Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
Sir, we'll be hearing from Tracy Marshall this morning.
Yeah.
So I think you're on mute, sir.
Can Miss Marshall be sworn, and then I'll raise a very short matter with you?
Of course.
You have to repeat after me.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly, declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, the issue which I wish to raise with you relates to some questions which Mr. Beer asked of Mr. Reid last week in respect of one or more emails going back to 2010 or 2011, which apparently were emails of which this witness will have knowledge. Let me try and put it as neutrally as possible. My understanding, Mr. Stevens, is that Mr. Reid did that in order to probe whether Ms. Marshall was an appropriate witness to give evidence on behalf of the post office in respect of what I'll call current policies and practices. And that was why he was raising issues from many years ago. You have made me aware, quite properly, that you intend to ask some questions about events in the period, and I'm deliberately choosing a wide period so that nobody thinks it's confined, between, say, 2010 and 2013 of this witness. And therefore, I have had to consider whether or not it is appropriate that this witness be given a direction about self-incrimination, that direction having been given to a number of witnesses who gave evidence about that period in time. My current view is that notwithstanding that there will be some questions about that period, it is not necessary for me to give that direction to Miss Marshall, but I wanted you to have the opportunity of making any observations about that current view before you start questioning, so to speak. So is there anything you'd like to say about that?
I agree, sir, and nothing further.
Right, fine. Well, then we'll proceed, but I should make it clear, as I hope is obvious to everyone, that in respect of something like a direction against self-incrimination, I keep that under review throughout the whole of the witness's evidence. And so it's open to me to change my mind, so to speak, if I think it appropriate.
Thank you, sir.
You, Mr. Stevens.
Please, could you state your full name? Ms. Marshall, thank you for attending the inquiry today to give evidence, and thank you for producing a written statement to which I want to turn now. You should have a copy in front of you.
Yes, I do.
Is that dated the 22nd of August 2024?
It is.
Now, before I turn to your signature, I understand there are a few minor changes to make, which I will take you through now, given they're minor in nature. If we could have the statement on the screen, please. And page 4. In paragraph 10A, you are discussing terms that you use throughout the statement, and you will see in the third line from the bottom, you say save for 114 directly managed branches. I understand that should read 111.
Correct, thank you.
And page 12, please. And if we go down to paragraph 30, please. Here you're talking about amendments to terms of contract between the Post Office and sub-postmasters. And you say, following the CIJ which is common issues judgment. Post Office made the decision to amend the template NT terms, referring to network transformation terms.
Yes.
And I understand after that should read and SPSO.
Yes, correct.
And that is an abbreviation, SPSO, for the standard sub-postmaster contract.
That's correct.
If we can please turn to page 47. In paragraph 108, you describe responsibility for various matters. You say, however, any changes to the scope of the postmaster contract would go through SEG and the Post Office Board for approval. I understand after postmaster contract, it should read or associated policies.
Correct, thank you.
And finally, page 60, please. And if we could go right to the bottom of the page, there's a footnote which we may need to zoom into. Given the nature of the correction, I'll just deal with it as the footnote rather than the context. It says reinstatement refers to the period following suspension or post-termination decision on appeal. And then I understand where that word appeal is. The words thereafter should be struck through. And in the place of those words, it should say where the postmaster is reinstated in their role.
Correct, thank you.
Thank you. The statement can come down from the screen, thank you. Could I ask you please to turn to page 78 of the statement?
Yes.
And below paragraph 199, you should see a signature.
Yes.
Is that your signature?
It is, yes.
And can you confirm that the contents of the statement are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, yes.
Thank you, Ms Marshall. That evidence that now stands as your evidence in the inquiry. It will be published on the website shortly, the inquiry's website, and for the record, the URN, the unique reference number, is WITN 11610100. Now, Ms Marshall, your witness statement was provided in response to two Rule 9 requests to Post Office as a company itself, rather than addressed directly to you.
That's correct, yes.
And for reasons that I don't need to go into now, you have been put forward as a witness to speak on behalf of Post Office on various matters within your statement.
I have, yes.
You are currently the Retail Engagement Director with Post Office Limited.
Yes, I am.
When did you first join the Post Office?
I joined in 1998, so I've been here for just over 25 years, 26 years.
And what was your role upon joining?
I joined as a graduate trainee initially for 18 months. And then I've progressed through the organisation through a variety of roles.
Well, if we pause there, as a graduate trainee, what sort of work, it's a very, very brief summary, what sort of work did you do?
There were 3 6-month secondments. One of them was working in a directly managed branch. They used to be called Crown branches. One of them was shadowing an area manager. I think they were called retail line managers. And the third role was in head office, a very administrative role within the finance function, just getting knowledge of head office operations.
Could you then summarize, what role did you go into after being a graduate trainee?
So I then went into being a branch manager in
Branch
one of
manager.
our Crown branches for just over 2 years.
And what was your next role?
After that, I did a variety of project and programme roles, predominantly for the next 4 or 5 years, I'd say, working on the franchising of our directly managed branches, so converting them from Crown status to being operated by postmasters, working with a number of independent postmasters and larger corporate entities too.
What period of time are we discussing when you were doing that role?
That would be up to 2007.
And whilst you were working with franchising and postmasters, were you working with matters such as appeals or suspensions, anything like that?
No, nothing like that at all. This was simply working with potential applicants to take on new branches and making sure that the transition from the Crown branch being operated by a new postmaster went smoothly. So nothing at all to do with suspensions or investigations.
And then from 2007, what role did you have?
So from 2007, I moved to be the programme office manager for a programme called Network Change. Now, Network Change involved the closure of around 2,500 branches from memory, and the implementation of what we now call outreach services, things like mobile vans across the network. That was a government-funded programme, and I effectively, for the next 3 years, ran a programme office, effectively making sure that we were on track with budgets, that we had reporting in place to our shareholder, and that all the necessary documentation went out to the right postmasters.
So that's 2007 to 2010. Can I just check, you may have been involved with post office closures as part of the programme. At that stage, were you involved in any respect in the termination of sub-postmasters' contracts because of alleged breaches, such as through discrepancies and the like?
No, I was not.
From 2010, what was your role, please?
For the next 2 years, I was Agents Development Manager. I had responsibility in that role working to Kevin Gilliland for postmaster remuneration and our postmaster contracts, which at that time were being updated in preparation for the next change programme, which was network transformation.
Were you involved in, as part of that, termination or suspension of postmasters as a result of alleged discrepancies?
I was not, no.
And then from 2012, what was your next role?
From 2012 through to 2017 or 18, I was involved in the network transformation programme. So this was the programme to ultimately convert post offices to new models, the main model and the local model.
So again, do I take it from that, not involved in termination, suspension, those sorts of matters?
I was not involved, no.
From 2017, please.
2017 to now, more senior leadership roles, responsible for initially some of our network strategy, and then more recently stepping into more of my current accountabilities around postmaster onboarding and postmaster training and some postmaster engagement.
Your roles and responsibilities now, when did you start undertaking those roles?
So for onboarding and training, which you see me talk about in my statement, I've been doing that for about 4 years, I would say. My responsibility for the contract management and deployment team only for the last year.
Thank you. I want to look at a particular period. I think it's when you're agent development manager.
Yes.
2010 to 2012. Did you say you reported to Kevin Gilliland?
I did.
And in what team or department did you sit in that role?
Kevin was I want to say Director of Network and Sales. So this was, Kevin had wider accountabilities for the network. He may have had responsibility for some of the field teams. He certainly had a team responsible for the relationship with the National Federation of Postmasters, and he had a team focused on sales capability in our branches, so a fairly wide remit.
Could we please bring up Poll 30888956? We see an email on the 5th of December 2010 from John Breeden. It's to Angela van den Bogert. If we just scroll down slightly, please, to see the email that's been forwarded. We see an email from Lynn Hobbs to John Breeden is being forwarded on. If we can go back to the top, please. We see that Mr. Breeden addresses it to Angela van den Bogert, but copies you in. We see you're the second person on the CC line. The subject says follow up to a meeting with the department, with the JFSA, and it attaches some documents regarding that. And I know you've seen this email. I'll come to the contents of it shortly. But firstly, why at this stage would John Breeden copy you into an email like this?
Having read the email trail, I'm not completely sure why I would have been copied in. I don't recall the email. John Breeden, I remember, had the contracts team. He had accountability for the team of contract advisors in the network. From time to time, John or Lynn Norbury, who may have been his boss at the time, would often copy me in on emails for information purposes. But I don't know why I would have been copied in here specifically.
So outside of this specific email, what was your working relationship with John Breeden? Not in terms of how did you get on, what substantively did you work on together?
So because I had accountability for, at this point, Postmaster remuneration and the Postmaster contracts themselves, sometimes John Breeden would reach out to myself or my team to ask for advice on the content of the contracts, for example, or advice on the structure of remuneration with Postmasters.
These issues, those issues you just referred to, don't appear to be raised in this email. Would you?
Agreed.
To what extent at this time were you involved with Post Office's response to allegations that had been raised by Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance?
I don't think I was involved with any of those allegations.
If we go to page 2 of the email, please. This is an email that's extremely well known to the inquiry. It says, my reply to Mike and Rod. It says, I found out this week that Fujitsu can actually put an entry into a branch account remotely. Goes on to say how that was found. And the final sentence, one solution, quickly discounted because of the implications around integrity, was for Fujitsu to remotely enter a value into a branch account to reintroduce the missing loss/gain. So Post Office can't do this, but Fujitsu can. Do you recall whether you read that email at the time?
No, I don't recall reading the email at the time. I was surprised to see it when it was disclosed to me as part of the inquiry. It's not something I would have been involved with, to my recollection, as part of the role that I was in at that time.
Let's move forward a month, if we can, please. Poll 20294728. So, see, this is an email from you to Kevin Gilliland, who you said earlier was your line manager.
He was, yes.
We see Angela van den Bogart is also an addressee of this email, and Helen Rose is copied in. The subject is Horizon System issues. It refers to conversations you'd had with Andy McLean and Dave Hulbert yesterday. You believe you made progress with the outstanding questions raised. Does this not show that you were involved with Post Office's response to allegations about the Horizon IT system and its integrity?
No, I don't think it does. And if it would help the inquiry for me just to provide a little bit of context. If that's okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, as I've said, during this time I worked for Kevin Gilliland, when my accountabilities were very specifically on Postmaster remuneration and Postmaster contracts. Very often, Kevin would ask members of his lead team, of which I was one of them, to go off and find information about other matters that were not relevant to the role that you were doing, to assist him in whatever he was doing in his role. From what I've read of this email, this is clearly to me, and whilst I don't recollect it at the time, it's clear to me that he was asking me to go off and find information out to perhaps prepare him for a meeting that he was going to with Angela shortly afterwards. I don't think I would have known, certainly wouldn't have known the ins and outs of the Horizon system, wouldn't have had any involvement in remote access. So my view of this email is that I have gone off, found information from the subject matter experts, in this case Andy McLean and Dave Hulbert within the IT team, and have relayed that information to Kevin Gilliland.
If we just scroll down slightly, please. You give some commentary on remote access. You say Post Office cannot remotely access systems and make changes to specific stock units, etc. Fujitsu can remotely access systems, and they do this on numerous occasions on a network-wide basis in order to remedy glitches in the system created as a result of new software upgrades. Technically, Fujitsu could access an individual branch remotely and move money around. However, this has never happened yet. You go on to refer to authority processes that are in place and say if a change were made remotely and to an individual branch, it would be flagged on the business data ledgers and would appear as a mismatch in PMBA in Chesterfield. So although changes can be made remotely, they will be spotted and the person making the change would be identified. In the last email I took you to, which referred to remote access, it referred to it not being used due to integrity concerns, but broadly speaking. Do you know why you didn't refer to the integrity concerns that were raised in that email when you reported to Angela and Kevin in this email?
I don't, and on reflection, I should have joined the dots, and when typing this email to Mr. Gilliland, have noted the previous email, assuming, of course, I read it, and I'm very sorry that I didn't do that in hindsight. But I would, say again, this was an area very much outside of my expertise and comfort zone, and it's very clear to me that I wouldn't have written this without very clear direction from experts on what to say.
So do I take it that your evidence is effectively what you've written down here is what you would have been told by Andy McLean and Dave Hulbert?
Absolutely.
That document could come down. I want to go to a slightly different issue, please. Poll 20119947. This is an undated letter, but we see from the first page that it refers to a appeal hearing on the 7th of December 2010 and then correspondence on 28th of February 2011, which gives us an indication. If we can just turn the page, please, and go towards the bottom, we'll see it was sent by Craig Tuthill. At the time, so early 2011, where did Craig Tuthill sit in the organisation to you?
Craig, I think at this time, whereas I was in a head office function, Craig was in a field role, managing the contract advisors or certainly working very closely with them. He may have worked to Lynn Hobbs at this period of time.
Was there any reporting line to you on that basis?
No, not at all.
Could we turn back to the first page, please? And go down, please. Thank you. It says, throughout the appeal hearing and the written submissions, you have raised doubts about the integrity of the Horizon accounting system and have offered no other reason for the losses incurred. You are adamant that neither you nor any of your staff acted dishonestly. It goes on to say a few lines down, I have also sought and received confirmation from Tracy Marshall, Post Office Limited Agents Development Manager, that Post Office Limited is fully satisfied that the Horizon system and accounting processes around it are robust and fit for purpose. She confirms the system is endorsed by the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters and has been subjected to independently assured testing processes. Information security is accredited to industry standards, and the system is also meets all payment industry standards. I mean, do you recall Mr. Tuthill coming to you about this appeal?
No, not specifically. Again, I saw this in my bundle. I don't remember this specific example. It would have been quite usual for Craig and his team to come to people in the centre, in the head office, if you like, to ask for a view on the business's position. And from time to time, I would, in my role here, have gone off to our communications team to find lines to send back out to the field teams.
So if we actually take you to a different document, it's poll 20119963, please. We see it's in an unusual format, but it appears to be an email from you to Craig Tuthill on the Monday, the 28th of February 2011. You say, Craig, Andy, this is the formal words used in external communications. I will be happy to circulate this to the contracts community if you think that this is fit for purpose. I think your evidence earlier was you would check with the communications team about what the business position was. Is that effectively what this is showing?
I believe so, yes. I think this is an example of when I've been asked a question. I've conferred with our communications team in the head office, and this form of words here would have been standard position lines used in external communications that I've been provided with via the comms team.
Did you have any role in, or did you take any steps to satisfy yourself that what was said there was accurate?
I don't think I would have done, no. I think I was relying on the information being provided to me by more senior leaders within the organisation.
Thank you. That document can come down. Aside from that type of matter there, where an appeal manager is coming to you for a business position on Horizon and you're giving an external communication, during that period of time in 2010 to 2012, were you involved in inputting or assisting appeal managers with making decisions on termination, or indeed contract managers on making decisions on termination of sub-postmasters?
No, I was not.
As we said earlier, you've been put forward as a corporate witness. You know that Fujitsu's ability to access branch accounts remotely and post officers' knowledge of that ability is being considered by this inquiry.
I do.
From the emails we looked at, would you accept that you were involved to a certain extent in the distribution of knowledge on remote access within Post Office?
I would accept here that there are emails where I've relayed information to people that concern remote access, a very core issue to the purpose of this inquiry. But I wouldn't say that I was involved or implicit in anything involving remote access.
To whatever extent you were involved, do you think that you're an appropriate person to give evidence on behalf of the Post Office because of that even a limited extent of involvement?
I think I am, and my role, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, have focused on delivering improvements and changes for postmasters on a number of core areas, including training and onboarding, etc. So I do think I am best placed in the organisation to be able to talk to those improvements and about what the current position is.
Can I ask why the matters we've just discussed now, why were they not referred to in your witness statement?
My witness statement was in response to specific Rule 9 requests, 2 of them, and that is the basis ultimately of my witness statement that I've prepared.
One further point before we move on to matters in your statement, please. Could we have poll 20448, sorry, poll 20448-411. It's a letter that's been seen by the inquiry before to various people, including Sir to you and to Mr. Beer. It's the 28th of May 2024, and it says, "We are writing to you as a group of highly disenfranchised Post Office employees." Have you read this letter before?
Only when it was provided to me as part of my bundle.
If we can go to the bottom of this page, please. It says at the bottom paragraph, "I'm sure you've been made aware that we have at least 120 employees who have been in long-term roles who have conflicts of interest, i.e. they were operating in roles which to a greater or lesser degree were involved in the wrongful prosecution of SPMs. Reid has known yet refuses to address the latter situation proactively despite being asked to. He reacts only to specific individuals after their names are called out in the public. For instance, Angela van den Bogert mentioned in her statement the role of Tracy Marshall. The latter played a prominent role in 2010/15 in the unlawful convictions of sub-postmasters." Pausing there, what do you have to say to that point?
I think I'm disappointed to see that there are disenfranchised employees in Post Office, firstly, who clearly have concerns about me in my role. I think there are some confusing facts in here that aren't quite right. I've never played a role, any role, in the unlawful convictions of postmasters. Whilst I can't state factually, I suspect that this here is in a direct response clearly to the emails that we've just gone through being shown in Mrs van den Bogaard's evidence in phase 5 or 6. But I'm disappointed that they feel that way about me.
It goes on to say, despite this, just 3 years ago, Marshall was appointed as the Postmaster Engagement Director, much to our dismay, and no wonder the trust results plummeted. However, only within the last week, Reid has removed Marshall from her role and appointed her into another obscure role. When did you change roles as Postmaster Engagement Director?
So I've never been Postmaster Engagement Director. I think they're referring to Retail Engagement Director, which is my current role. Following the email appearing in Mrs van den Bogaard's evidence, I was asked to step back from some of my role. So in late May, early June of this year, I stood down from the Postmaster engagement element of my role, effectively, which is a very small team of 2 individuals, plus the Postmaster Experience Director, Mark Eldridge. So my role hasn't changed. I've just had some of my responsibilities removed from it. And my role continues to include onboarding, training and the contract management team.
And do you consider yourself to be in an appropriate position to carry out those roles, given your past involvement, which we've discussed?
I think so, yes. I mean, for the last 4 years particularly, my role has been completely focused on trying to do the right thing by postmasters and making changes to our policies, procedures, processes, and listening to postmasters as much as I can and trying to make changes. So I do still feel as though I'm in a very good position to do my role.
Let's look at some of those policies, procedures now. I want to start with the types of contracts that, on the basis on which Post Office contracts with postmasters. There was clearly a shift in Post Office's view of what the contract meant following the Common Issues judgment. Could we have, please, page 5, paragraph 15 of your statement on the screen? You refer to the standard sub-postmaster contract, which I think we see in your statement elsewhere as SPSO, is that?
Yes, correct.
And you say it's the oldest contract, first introduced between 1991 and 1994.
Yes, I believe so.
Since that was introduced, is it fair to say the majority of postmasters who originally signed on to that contract have been transferred onto a different network transformation contract?
That's correct.
How many sub-postmasters or postmasters, remain on the standard sub-postmaster contract?
I don't have the specific figures to hand, I'm afraid, so I can't really comment on that. I think it might be around 1,000, but I couldn't be sure.
Does Post Office issue the standard sub-postmaster contract to any new applicants or new sub-postmasters that it onboards?
Yes, it does from time to time. There are still some branches who are on an SPSO contract who continue to have the ability, if they wanted to sell their branch and premises to a new postmaster on those terms. It doesn't happen that often. I recall a couple of 100 cases that I'm aware of over the last few years, but yes, it does happen.
Can I understand that? Do you mean that a postmaster on the standard sub-postmaster contract will sell the branch to a new sub-postmaster, and then they will still be on the old, when I say the old, on the standard sub-postmaster contract?
That's correct, sir, yes.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, I understand, yeah.
I want to look at what steps Post Office have taken to clarify the written terms to sub-postmasters of the contracts following Common Issues. Could we turn to page 12, please, paragraph 30? You say, following the Common Issues judgment, Post Office made the decision to amend the template NT terms, and it should say, and SPSO
It
terms.
should, yes.
Being issued to new postmasters to reflect the court's determination, as set out in the contract restatement guide, and to focus on making operational improvements and positive changes to the way it works with postmasters before making widespread changes to its standard contractual terms. And I understand from your evidence what the Post Office did was to send out a contract restatement document to explain the effect of Common Issues.
Yes, it did.
Could we look at that, please? It's POL 3037518. Is this the document to which you were referring, the contract restatement?
It is, yes.
How was this sent to postmasters in the network?
So from what I can understand, it was sent out to postmasters electronically via a channel known as the One Communications channel. This was a tool used by our communications team quite regularly to send out messages to postmasters. So this was sent electronically.
Why wasn't it sent in hard copy as well?
I honestly do not know. I wasn't involved at the time, but I believe it should have been sent out in hard copy. All I can say is that when we make any changes now to our contract terms, we always make sure that hard copies are sent out to postmasters, first and foremost, so that we have a record that it's been delivered and received by the postmaster via special delivery. I can't comment on why that wasn't the case here, I'm afraid.
In your we don't need to bring it up. In your statement, you say that Post Office did not have a system for ensuring that sub-postmasters had read the contractual restatement guide.
Yes.
Why not?
I don't know, and the business should have done. What should have happened, in my view here, is that this document was sent out in hard copy to every postmaster by special delivery, so that we had a record of it being received first and foremost. And it should have been followed up, in my opinion, with check-ins from our field team members to make sure that those postmasters had understood the terms and had received them. I can't comment on why that didn't happen, I'm afraid.
Is there any plan in Post Office at the moment to correct this issue by taking the steps you've just suggested now?
So there are two things that we're doing. First of all, it's making sure that this document here is available for all postmasters to view again. That won't be hard copy for reasons I'll come on to, but it will be made available and is on our branch hub tool. The second thing that we are doing is looking at what we call the contract reform project. So we are underway with making some other changes to our contract, suggestive changes.
If I can pause you there, that's changes to a contract. Yeah. I'm interested in what Post Office is doing to explain the contractual terms as they are at the moment. You said in your evidence that there wasn't a plan to issue this in hard copy. Why?
It's a very good question, something I think we need to think again about as a business. All postmasters should have access to this.
Earlier in your evidence, you said previously it should have been sent out in hard copy. Is there any good reason why it's not sent in hard copy now?
No, absolutely none.
Are you in a position to say the Post Office will
I think
at least consider it?
We will absolutely consider, and I think we should make sure that all postmasters have hard copies of this document.
If we look at the what the document says, please, if we go to page 2, it says, it refers to the judgment, the common issues trial, and then says the judgment changes the meaning of the contracts. Do you know who came up with that wording? It changes the meaning of the contract.
I don't, I'm afraid.
Do you agree with that?
I think from what I know of the implied terms that have been added into the contracts, I do think it changes the meaning of the contracts in that it's moved them. It's certainly added more obligations on Post Office, and I think it is a fairer contract, particularly in the areas of losses and shortfalls, for example. I'm not sure if it specifically changes the meaning of the contracts, however.
Well, as you noted there, it says it implies, brackets, adds some new terms to the contracts. Has Post Office ever communicated to sub-postmasters that the terms that were found to be implied into the contract in common issues judgment applied before the judgment was issued and not after it as well. So Post Office was bound by them before the judgment.
I've not seen anything to suggest that, no.
That can come down, thank you. It's been suggested by some postmasters that it's confusing to have a contract and then a separate guide explaining it, such as this. What do you say to that?
I would agree. I think it's very important that every postmaster out there has a contract with those new terms added in to that contract. Again, I can't comment why at the time steps weren't taken to amend the contracts and send new contracts out, and why it was simply done via a contract restatement guide.
That wasn't within your purview?
No, it wasn't, no.
Do you know who made those decisions?
I can't recall who would have been responsible for contract change at that time. Obviously, our legal team would have been very involved with it. It would have, I think, sat within the remit of Julie Thomas, who was one of the operations directors within the business, but I can't be sure.
Just another point on this and on how it was communicated. Can we please look at page 45 of your statement, paragraph 107? Subparagraph A, for context, in the main body of the paragraph, you refer to postmaster contracts and the key policies and guidelines relating to contractual liability for postmasters. You then say, you refer to the contract restatement guide. Is that the document we were just referring to on the screen?
It is, yes.
You say this document was published on the One communication channel on 29th July 2020, which you just said in your evidence. As part of this exercise in responding to the Rule 9 requests, the retail team have been advised that due to an archiving exercise, the document is no longer held on Branch Hub, and the retail team have arranged to reinstate it so that it can be readily accessed by postmasters. Is that document now back on One communication channel?
It's back on Branch Hub.
Branch Hub,
yes.
Sorry. Yes. The Rule 9 request to which this statement was provided, well, there was two, sorry. One was 12th July 2024, one was 2nd July 12th June 2024, one 2nd July 2024. Do you know when it was realised that the document wasn't on Branch Hub?
Not specifically, but it would have been around the time of those Rule 9 requests coming in and in me preparing my witness statement.
When you say as part of it was taken down as part of an archiving exercise, when did that archiving exercise take place?
I don't know, I'm afraid.
Is that something that the Post Office can tell the inquiry in due course?
Quite possibly, yes.
Was there any other document which a postmaster could turn to that explained the effect of common issues other than that contract restatement document?
No other document specifically on that would explain the common issues judgment impact. There are obviously a number of other contractual documents, such as the operations manual, which was updated around that time, but that didn't specifically address CIJ impacts.
Do you know why, as part of an archiving exercise, such an important document was taken down from Branch Hub?
I don't, I'm afraid, no.
Can we look, please, at Poll 20448241? this is a standard sub-postmaster contract. And if we turn to page 5, please. And to the bottom, to paragraph 20, please. It says, each party shall, at all times, in the performance of its obligations and exercise of its rights under this contract, act in good faith. So it looks like this is an amended contract following or making changes as a result of common issues.
I agree. I think it is, and it's dated August 2020 in the footer there.
But you say that in your exhibit list to your statement at number 4. We don't need to bring it up. The document description is SPSO individual contract V3 December 2023.
Oh, okay.
Are you able to assist with when the changes were made to the sub-postmaster contract to reflect what was said in common issues?
So changes were made to the SPSO contract and the 2 network transformation contracts after the common issues judgment was handed down, to the best of my knowledge, in 2020. There might have been some small iterations, changes to it since then, but fundamentally the new implied terms were added in 2020.
And just so we're clear, that applies, does it, to new sub-postmasters joining the network? That's the contract. These are the contractual terms they're given upon joining.
New postmasters joining the contract would get this, yes.
Thank you. That document can come down, thank you. Could we look, please, at your statement, page 12, paragraph 31 and 32. Starts on, yeah, that's great, thank you. If you just go down a bit further to have 31 at the top. Thank you. You give example of changes made to various policies in the summer of 2020. And so it sets out the range of support available to postmasters and their staff. And then if we go further down, thank you. The Postmaster Support Guide is updated annually to take account of changes. And the Postmaster Support Guide contains the following key areas. See, there's general support, training, managing cash, branch balancing, carry on, accounting dispute resolution. So quite serious material issues for a sub-postmaster, yes?
Yes, issues that they would absolutely need advice and support on in running their branch.
What steps are aside from these being written down as policies, what steps have been taken to ensure that there is appropriate resourcing to implement these policies properly?
Okay. So just to clarify, the Postmaster Support Guide isn't a policy as such. That's an overarching document providing advice and support to postmasters. In the back of the Postmaster Support Guide, there is an overview of the 12 postmaster policies that we have put in place across all areas of the postmaster life cycle to assist internal colleagues and make sure that processes are followed correctly. Part of my role as being accountable for those postmaster policies is to make sure that the various teams can deliver them in their respective teams, and to do that, clearly they do need resource to be able to do that effectively. Resourcing is a challenge in some areas, if I'm honest. I'm very aware of the broader business issues that we have. We're funded by government. There are cost challenges. I'm confident we do have resources in place to deliver against the policies. We could always do with a little bit more resource, though, in some areas.
Do the Firstly, the 12 policies you refer to, you I think use the word internal. You're doing a statement, I think. They're not accessible by... sub-postmasters don't have access to those 12 policies, do they?
Not at the moment, no. They don't have access to the full policies, but what there is a guide to the postmaster policies, which is a shortened version of each one effectively that postmasters can view, which is on Branch Hub.
Why are they not given full access to the full policy?
It's a question that I've debated quite a lot over recent years with various colleagues in our data protection, legal teams, etc. The policies themselves, which are internally facing, has quite detailed information in them around our control framework, our risk appetite as a business and risks, and it wasn't felt appropriate to disclose that information externally, rightly or wrongly, and that was the very clear steer that I had. If it helps inquiry, though, we are in the process actually right now of putting each one of our 12 policies onto a new template. That template's been developed by colleagues in data protection, the legal teams and the assurance teams. And those policies will be made available shortly to postmasters, following agreement, obviously, by our Audit and Risk Committee and GE.
Last point on these policies. With the change in the policies in the summer of, as they've changed and developed since Common Issues, has that placed more or greater obligations more obligations on Post Office than it did before the changes? So there's more to do effectively, more work to do to fulfil those policies than before?
I think that's very true. Yes, they have.
Has there been any increase in resources to meet those policies?
There's been some increase in resources. In my own team, for example, who manage the policies, we do now have more people to make sure that we are getting them annually reviewed by the right people, that we have group assurance as well in place now, checking our policies, checking our control framework, and that we have actions in place to mitigate any of the key risks. So yes, resource has been put in place.
Can we look, please, at your statement, page 17, paragraph 36? Thank you. This is going back to something I cut you off on earlier. You're referring here, July 24, the retail engagement team presented a proposal for the contract reform project to the strategic executive group. Why has this contract reform project been started? What's its purpose?
As a business, we've been talking about doing a more wide-scale update of our contracts and getting new copies out to everybody for some time.
Okay, is that pausing there? When you say some time, from roughly...
I'd say a few years. And for whatever reason, the business decision has been taken not to do that activity at that particular point in time. To give an example, at one point, obviously, we were anticipating the rollout of our new branch IT system into branches. And so it was considered that we should perhaps delay some of this work until that system was in, and there may be changes that are needed as part of the introduction of that system. For a few years, we've been talking about it. The retail team have been pushing quite strongly, as have our legal team, to make sure that we do this activity. I feel this is very important for the reasons I said earlier. I think it's important to get contracts out to every postmaster, new contracts that do have the implied terms in them from the Common Issues judgment. And we are now doing that. So we've already made some proposed, and I stress the word proposed, changes to the contracts with external legal. And our next stage, which we'll be doing later in October or November, is to go to our strategic executive group and take them through them. And the next step will be then to engage with Postmasters. The NFSP obviously will need to be consulted with as part of that process, look at what we're proposing to do, and then hopefully we can get in a position where we send contracts out.
It might be said that our reason for not bringing these contract proposals sooner or enacting them more quickly is to avoid the proposals being scrutinised by this inquiry. What would you say to that?
I don't think that's the case.
Paragraph 36B, you refer to removing specific rights. What rights at the moment in the proposals are being envisaged to be removed?
I can't think of any specific rights, if I'm honest. I can give some examples of other outdated terms and references that might be removed, if that would be helpful.
Are there any rights, obligations or terms that could be perceived to be beneficial to a sub-postmaster that are being proposed to be removed?
I don't believe so, no. In fact, I think the changes are much more favourable to postmasters and more obligations on post office.
Thank you. That can come down. So that's probably a good time to take our morning break.
All right.
If we could say 1:15. Thank you. So can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
First, I'll apologise to the transcriber for initially undercooking our 15-minute break, and then so I apologise to you for overcompensating by giving a 20-minute one. So,
well, Mr. Stevens, I did wonder about your 11:15, but by the time I thought I would revisit that with you, my connection had been broken. So one way or another, we got ourselves an extra 5 minutes. That's what it boils down to.
Thank you, sir. Right, I want to move on to training, please. And as Retail Engagement Director, you are accountable to the Post Office Board for the design and implementation of Postmaster training.
That's correct.
You are supported in that role by the Head of Training.
I am.
I want to look at the job description, please, for Head of Training. It's POL 20448046. So, job title, Head of Training. The Head of Training obviously involves training for postmasters. Are there any other types of worker, I don't use that in a technical sense, but types of worker for who the Head of Training is responsible for their training?
No, it's the development and delivery of training for postmasters and those operating our branches. So it would also be those working in our DMBs, for example.
If we look, please, at page 3, and we've got the knowledge, experience and skills. Leadership first, second, experience or background of training, third, knowledge of training-related models, various other matters, including a good understanding of business strategy, policies and operations. There doesn't appear to be any need for knowledge or experience of IT or Horizon. Is that fair?
That is fair, yes.
Why is that?
So I think as the head of the training team, the individual's job is to provide leadership and make sure that a good quality of training is being delivered. Those working into the head of training and who are delivering classroom training, for example, do absolutely have to have a good knowledge of our Horizon system. But I don't believe it's essential for this particular role, providing leadership to that team.
So who is responsible for the content of the training on Horizon itself?
So ultimately that would be me being accountable and the head of training being responsible for the production of all the content.
And to who can you turn for advice on whether the aspects of training relating to Horizon are appropriate or sufficient for sub-postmasters?
When we're developing our training content, be it classroom courses or e-learning modules or work aids, we are reliant on discussions with the various subject matter experts within the business. So, for example, if there's something around cash and stock management, for argument's sake, we would go to our cash and stock management team. If there's something there around discrepancies, we would confer with Mel Park's team.
Many of the policy documents on training say that Post Office is committed to providing comprehensive training to postmasters.
Yes.
What, if any, funding is there for postmasters to engage in training?
So there's no particular funding provided to postmasters or anybody operating our branches to go to training. So we don't, for example, pay for postmasters or their assistants to go to a training course. Over the last few years, many of our training has moved to being more digital in format, and that's as a result of postmaster feedback. And of course, that collateral, which is on Branch Hub or our learning management system, is freely available to anybody working in a branch to access, free of charge.
It still requires them to commit hours to it.
It does.
And the hours they're committing to the training is hours they're not committing to their profitable business.
That's true. It does require commitment, yes.
And presumably for assistants, the hours that they have to commit to training, the postmaster has to pay them while they're doing that training.
They would have to, yes.
Could we look, please, at your statement, page 22, paragraph 47? You say these are some of the training courses that have been introduced since the Common Issues Judgment, and at D you refer to investigating discrepancies, and that's a half-day classroom course and work aid. That sounds like quite a significant or important piece of training that is available to postmasters. Would you agree?
It's proved to be very useful for postmasters, yes. And many of them who have attended it have said that it's been, very positive, well received, with good levels of confidence, shall we say, after attending. Yes.
Because it's a half-day classroom, that requires a postmaster or assistant to be out of the post office for at least half a day. Yes?
It does, yes.
Do you think the fact that postmasters aren't paid or remunerated for doing that course is a significant barrier preventing them from engaging with it?
It could be. I've got no evidence to suggest that it is a barrier to them attending, but it could be.
Have Post Office do you have any data to understand how many people want to attend that course as against how many people in fact attend it?
No, I don't. We only have statistics on the number of people who do attend the course.
Is it fair to say that one of the purposes of training on matters like investigating discrepancies is to reduce discrepancies overall, or at least reduce the need for Post Office to investigate them?
I agree that there is the requirement for training on investigating discrepancies is ultimately to get to the root cause of the issue and prevent discrepancies from taking place in the first place. So the concept of investigating discrepancies is something that's very important. This classroom course here, the half-day classroom course, is just one aspect of that. But in addition, there's a variety of other material that has been developed and is available digitally which will assist postmasters or members of their team in helping them to investigate those discrepancies. The digital format of training is something that we as a business and I want to explore more of. From what I hear from postmasters, you know, they're busy people running retail businesses as well alongside their post office. And for many, the preference is not to have to travel to a classroom, irrespective of costs. It's to be able to do training in the comfort of their own premises, their own home, perhaps in the evening as well. So that's something that we want to explore more of.
Is there any plan within the Post Office to consider or assess the impact of any proposals to fund sub-postmasters or their assistants to do training?
There's no proposals at the moment, but obviously that's something that I can absolutely take back and consider in the wider business.
I want to look at some of the training guides. We don't need to bring it up. In your statement, you refer to, at paragraph 77, the operational training guide being a fundamental tool for both new and existing postmasters.
Yes.
Who is responsible for keeping that material up to date?
That's the training team.
Could we look, please, at POL 204483131? This is about monthly accounting for trading period balance. Is this taken from the operational training guide?
Yes, it is.
So it covers, as I say, monthly accounting and balancing. Please could we go to page 3. So we've got settling discrepancies, and these are options that are given to postmasters when there's a discrepancy prior to rolling into the next trading period. One is review dispute, call business support centre. Another is make good cash. I'll be exploring that in more detail with a different witness, but I want to look at the content of this document with you. Under make good cash, it says this is optional. If you would like to settle the discrepancy without disputing it, you can select this option, then physically add or remove cash to balance without a discrepancy. Do you think that is a satisfactory description of when sub-postmasters, or the guidance for sub-postmasters in using the make good cash?
I do not think it's satisfactory.
Why isn't it satisfactory?
I don't think that that is clear enough that if any postmaster or officer in charge chooses to put cash in from their own pocket effectively, they should do so only if they are absolutely sure that it's due to something that has happened in branch that is an error of some sort, not with the system, but where you might have, for example, given the customer £20 more, or etc. We are in the process actually of updating this section of the operational training guide and any other documentation that refers to something similar to make that message very clear.
Just pausing there, see, in the process, the date on this document is July 2023.
Yes.
Why has it taken so long to make what appears to be a clear position of Post Office evident in the training guide?
And that's a very good point. I think whilst people within Post Office, myself, our teams, are very aware ourselves of what should happen, i.e. you should only put cash in if you're absolutely certain that it's something that's been done in the branch, not related to an issue with Horizon or something that needs to be investigated further. It's one thing for us to think that. I don't think we've quite got that message across to postmasters. There's no excuse. It should have been done quicker. But I'm comforted by the fact that we're now doing it and taking the opportunity to review all of our operational training materials.
When will this be corrected?
I think if it's not out there already now, it's imminent by the end of October.
Further down, it says how to dispute a discrepancy. We don't need to worry about strategic partner branches. It says all other branches, whichever option you use to settle a discrepancy at the end of the trading period, you can still dispute the discrepancy with Post Office. To do this, contact the branch support centre. If you can demonstrate the reason for the discrepancy, or if you firmly believe the discrepancy will be resolved through a transaction correction, please call the branch support centre with all the details you have. Is that not putting the burden on the Postmaster to show that the discrepancy it is not the Postmaster's fault, rather than the investigative obligation being on the Post Office?
Reading it back now, it could give that impression, yes. And again, that's something that we should look at.
So pausing there, you say we should look at. Is this currently not proposed to be amended as part of the changes you were describing before?
Not currently, as to the best of my knowledge. However, I will absolutely take this away to be amended and looked at. But you're right, the onus is on Post Office to investigate any discrepancies, should the Postmaster wishes to.
Over the page, please, page 4. There's more guidance on, it says at the top, guidance on disputing a discrepancy or transaction correction. This is what happens at the end of the investigation. And the second paragraph, if a discrepancy amount has been investigated by Post Office or agreed by the Postmaster and is found to be a genuine loss to Post Office, the discrepancy will be passed to the Postmaster's account support team to support you through the options regarding settling the amount. Should that also say, and is found to be a genuine loss to the Post Office and caused by your negligence, carelessness or error?
Perhaps, yes, as that would be more aligned to the wording in our contracts.
Do you know if this wording is being considered to be changed as part of the review?
I don't think so, but again, very happy to take that away and make sure it's implemented quickly.
It might be said that this guidance isn't clear in the training because Post Office are seeking to downplay their investigative obligations, or when they make good with cash button should be used. What would you say to that?
I don't think that's true at all. I accept the fact that the wording could be better, but Post Office, to the best of my knowledge and from my work with other teams, are absolutely not trying to downplay two fundamental issues here. The first of which is that it is upon Post Office to work with the Postmaster, support them in thoroughly investigating any discrepancies. And the second point, as you've mentioned, is we're very clear that Postmasters should only put their hand in their purse and put money in the till if they are absolutely sure that it is a genuine mistake that's been made in branch that they can recall. So I'm very clear on that.
Does what we saw there in the operational training guide, does that reflect what's taught in classrooms and on the various online resources?
The wording in that guide that you've just showed me, I'm sure would be consistent with the other materials used. You know, the team do take steps to make sure that wording across all of our learning materials is consistent for good reason. So when I'm going back and making some changes to those documents, I will need to look at the wider training collateral there, which will include classroom content too.
Please could we look at page 36 of your statement, paragraph 83. You give a description there of how members of the training team are trained. You say they're trained internally. I don't need to read the rest of that out. It can be read. How many of the trainers working now in the training team were in post as trainers before the common issues judgment?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, I'm afraid. There is quite a high churn rate in our training team, so a good proportion are, you know, over the last 5 or 6 years, definitely, but I can't say for sure.
We've heard evidence of post officers' previous view of the obligations on sub-postmasters in respect of settling discrepancies. What steps is Post Office taking to ensure that those who were giving training on the pre-common issues training course, they're not carrying over that institutional understanding of how the contract used to work into today's training programme?
Sure. Well, I think for anybody working in Post Office, not just the training team, and you may have heard our People Director talk about that, Chief People Officer Karen McEwen last week, we do have structured training in place now for all new starters, which involves, you know, understanding the horizon issues of the past, the findings from the common issues judgment, the horizon issues judgment, and actually, you know, watching excerpts from this inquiry to understand the previous issues that we had and the need to change, both culturally and operationally. So specifically to the trainers, they would have, any new people joining the team would have that level of training.
Just pausing there. It's not. I'm not interested really in the new people. It's the people who used to train before common issues.
So for existing trainers who might have been in post prior to common issues judgment, they will have also gone through various modules to get an understanding of what happened in the past, what needs to change. They will also, of course, been able to view our training policy. They have to look at our training policy, and we have records annually that they've looked at that and understood that and been trained out on it. And of course, our trainers as well are all quality assured. They're observed on a regular basis by the leaders in the team to make sure that they are delivering in the very best possible way and to the standards that we expect. So I'm confident that if there were anything being trained out that wasn't, you know, was pre-CIJ and shouldn't be in terms of approach to shortfalls, for example, that if that did happen, it would have been stamped out very quickly. I'm not aware of any examples of that, though.
I should also clarify, so I should have said my question wasn't aimed at new trainees, not that I'm not interested in it. Clearly, we are looking at that as well.
Apologies.
My question wasn't aimed at that. We don't need to bring it up, but at page 42 of your statement, paragraph 100, you refer to a feedback committee being established in June 2024 to collate feedback received on training, analyse it for patterns and trends, and take any steps deemed necessary. What was done with feedback prior to June 2024?
So I think prior to June 2024, we received feedback from postmasters or people going on training at the various stages of the learning cycle. Excuse me. So we'd have feedback provided after e-learning had been completed online, feedback after attendance at classroom, feedback after an on-site trainer had been out to support postmasters, and then feedback from new postmasters after the first few months of them being in operation, as well as getting feedback from those who use our materials on our learning management system, etc. But I think it's fair to say that within the respective teams, that data was being analysed and looked at perhaps in a slightly siloed way. So what this has tried to do is bring all of those component parts together. So everybody responsible for all of those elements are meeting now regularly, looking at the data holistically and understanding what needs to be done in response to that feedback. It's very early days. The first one was only in June, but I think it's working well.
Could we please bring up XPG 607? This is the Yugov survey that was produced for the inquiry. Have you had a chance to
Yes, I have.
read this? Could I ask to turn, please, to page 16. And if you could go to the table at the bottom, please. We have satisfaction responses from, in relation to the Horizon training, by length of time working as a postmaster, which obviously will be relevant to the types of training it's engaged at. Looking at the 2 years or less and the 3 to 5 years, the levels of satisfaction and dissatisfaction, is that consistent with the feedback Post Office has been receiving through its own feedback forms?
It's not, and it was very disappointing to see these statistics, if I'm honest.
I take it from you saying it was disappointing. Your feedback you received directly from Post Office directly from sub-postmasters is better than what's shown here.
It is. It's much better than is shown here. A short while ago, I just illustrated some of the feedback we get at the various stages of the postmaster life cycle, after e-learning, after classroom, after on-site training, and then post a branch going live. And of course, that's for new postmasters coming in their onboarding journey. And at every one of those stages, we ask the postmasters to rate how confident they are with progressing as one metric, and it's a score out of 10, a scale of 1 to 10. And across all of those component parts of training, we've consistently seen levels of plus 90%. So that's why I was very disappointed to see these results, because there is quite a stark difference there.
Is there any proposal to investigate the cause of the difference between the level, the feedback you receive and the feedback that's been found in this Yugov survey?
I think with all of the statistics and feedback in this Yugov report overall, absolutely. You know, the business are, and I am, for my areas, looking at these results and understanding what more we need to do given this feedback. I think it's very hard, obviously, when you don't know quite rightly, you know, who these postmasters are, who've experienced this. But we take this very seriously, and if people feel like this, we need to do more.
Thank you. That can come down. I want to move on to a very brief point on branch assurance / audit. Sorry, sir.
While it's on my mind, there are two things I'd like a bit more information about. First of all, on surveying people's satisfaction, so to speak, with training, in effect, you were saying that your feedback to the Post Office directly reports much higher numbers of people who are satisfied with the training they received. In respect of your surveys, do a high proportion of the people undergoing the training actually provide feedback as well?
It varies depending on the stage, sir. It's a very good question. I believe that after classroom, for example, the feedback forms are provided to the delegates after the classroom, so in person, if you like. So there's obviously a very good response rate there. For on-site trainers and post go live, I'd have to check the details, but I think it's more on a voluntary basis, if you like, from the postmaster. So response rates might be fairly low there.
Yeah, that's what I'm struggling with, and I'm making that admission openly about the survey information I'm getting, because obviously the percentage of people completing the Yugov survey is comparatively low compared with the whole number of postmasters. So I wanted to know whether the same applied to your surveys or something different, if you see what I mean.
I see exactly what you mean, sir. It's a very good question, and you know, completion of surveys and response rates is something that plays on not just my mind, but I'm sure many of my colleagues' minds. We would love to get more people responding to surveys generally across the organisation. Response rates are, aside from our annual Postmaster survey that we do, which, you know, earlier on this year had over 1,900 responses, the surveys that we do within the respective business units on operational issues, they're quite low. And we'd love to encourage more feedback, but sadly, that's not materialised yet.
Anyway, I think you've answered my question in the sense that, if I summarise it in this way, apart from those instances where people are completing a survey following a classroom exercise, the post office struggles to get a substantial number of its cohort answering the surveys in a similar way to the struggle that Yugov had to get people to respond. Is that fair?
That's fair, sir. Yes.
Okay, that was that. Then I had just a point of detail. Could we go back, please, to paragraph 47 of your witness statement? It's WITN 116-10100. And that's where you describe the training that continues to be available, if I can put it in that way, for sub-postmasters.
Coming to that. Yes.
And I wanted to focus on the subparagraph D, investigating discrepancies, all right? And 2 points I wanted clarification of. Is investigating discrepancies part of the mandatory training that people who are newly joining as as postmasters undergo post CIJ?
So in part, yes, it is, sir. In the initial classroom training, e-learning and on-site support, new postmasters and their assistants as well in branch will be taken through ways in which they can help themselves in branch with operational procedures to minimise discrepancies and what steps to be taken if there is a discrepancy to try and get to the bottom of it. So it is in there across the various approaches.
Right. So I think you describe in detail the what I'll call onboarding training from, I think it's paragraph 50 onwards of your statement. But anyway, there's a whole section on the training received right at the start. And I must have missed it because I couldn't find in that specific reference to part of the training being investigating discrepancies. But you tell me that it is part of it.
It is part at various stages. There's lots of material in it, and it is covered as part of our classroom and on-site training support too. The investigating discrepancies half-day classroom course is, just by the length of time, more detailed and is available not on a mandatory basis, but for anybody who wants to go along to have more training to help them in their branch.
Right, and that leads me to my second point of detail. In respect of that specific half-day classroom course on investigating discrepancies, do you find that you're got more people who want to attend it than you can supply, or what? Or is there not very much of a take-up from sub-postmasters or postmasters? Can you give me some feel for that?
Sure. I don't think there's as much take-up as I would like, sir, if I'm honest. I think over the last 6 months or so, I think we've had around 200 delegates on that particular course, although I'm not entirely sure of my facts there. I think what I find, sir, is a general lack of awareness still from postmasters and their teams about what training is available to us. And that's one thing, again, that we're exploring at the moment, how we can better advocate the range of training materials that are out there, and get more postmasters to take us up on them.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Stevens, over to you again now.
Thank you, sir. A brief point on branch assurance/audit. The inquiry's heard evidence about post office auditors logging onto branch terminals and making adjustments to stamps without postmaster's knowledge. I just want to explore one element of that with you. Please can we bring up NFSP 401468? There's an email at the bottom from Callum Greenhow to you on the 10th of May 2023. It says, Tracy, it's come to my attention that post office personnel are visiting postmasters, including audits, brackets, Putney PO, where area managers, auditors are entering stock values into Horizon without either consultation or agreement with the postmaster. It says, if these facts are correct, then the NFSP would like to know who has authorised this policy within Post Office and why it has not been discussed with the NFSP in advance, and goes on to set out some further matters. Firstly, were you involved in investigating this issue following this email?
I wasn't specifically involved in investigating the issue. The reason I got the email is because at the time I was accountable for the relationship with the NFSP. But the issue was investigated, yes.
And do you know what happened as a result of that investigation?
I do. So as a result of the investigation, I believe Post Office held its hands up and said, absolutely, this shouldn't be happening. And as a result of that, that practice has absolutely stopped now in branches. There was a follow-up call with Mr. Greenhow and I think Keith Richards from the NFSP as well a short time after this to update them on the outcome of our investigation and assure them that wasn't now happening.
Are you aware of how this practice began or whether there was a policy in place?
I'm not, I'm afraid. I mean, I've never had any accountability for the branch assurance team. And it's certainly not something that's in our postmaster policy.
That can come down, thank you. I want to turn to suspension, reinstatement and termination. You've given figures in your witness statement, which I'll turn to in a moment, about the number of branches, I think it's number of branches rather than sub-postmasters, where there has been a termination, suspension or reinstatement since financial year 2017.
Yes, that's correct.
You say that Post Office doesn't hold a central record of that data, so it's likely that the record or the information you provided is incomplete.
For prior to 17-18 financial year, I think, yes.
But post-17, is that?
I'd have to just get up the relevant
part
of
get
my witness statement if we can.
Page 61, please. Sorry, page 60, my apologies. And paragraph 143, please. You say for financial years 2017-18, 2018-19, Post Office did not keep records that identified whether the SRT was based on Horizon data. So that's in relation to
correct.
2017 and 18. If we go to paragraph 140, please. You say Post Office does not hold a complete record of historical data in relation to postmaster suspensions, reinstatements or terminations. Prior to financial year 2017-18, the contract team was managed as two separate teams and each team holding their own data. it may be possible that some additional data from pre-2017 exists that could be derived from a manual review of individual branch files. So that first sentence, Post Office does not hold a complete record of historical data in relation to Postmaster suspensions, etc. Is that aimed at years before the financial year 2017-18?
Yes, the way it's written here, yes, it should be prior to that year.
So we can be confident, can we, that if we turn the page to page 61, the figures given here are...
The figures of the numbers of
Yes.
them are accurate to the best of our knowledge, absolutely.
But in the brackets where they're asterisks,
Yes,
sorry, I should say brackets relate to where Horizon data was used or thought to be used.
exactly.
Where there are asterisks, that's been done on a, as I understand it, a look-back review of available data, and that's the best estimation of a case that's based on Horizon data.
Correct.
Could you expand on what you mean by where the SRT, the suspension, reinstatement or termination was based on Horizon data?
Yes, so if suspensions or terminations were based on, as a result of discrepancies or shortfalls occurring in branch, ultimately, that would be what I'm referring to here as based on Horizon data.
So we see financial year 2019 to 2020, common issues judgment would have just been handed down at the start.
Yes.
December 2019, we have Horizon issues judgment, and we see there's a drop in cases of both suspensions and terminations. Is the drop, are you able to say if the drop is because of the judgments in the group litigation or something else?
I think that the drop in those cases and over subsequent years is as a result of the findings from the common issues judgment, Horizon issues judgment, but as well as Post Office introducing its policies, which we've talked about previously, which I think provide greater clarity on the circumstances in which suspension or ultimately termination should be enacted.
We see that in the subsequent years, and noting that the 2024-5 year is only to 24th of June, there are still contract suspensions and terminations based on Horizon data.
Correct.
What is Post Office's basis for terminating contracts using data generated by the Horizon IT system?
So we will, our contracts team will take a decision to suspend or terminate someone's contract. If discrepancies are involved, which is the use of Horizon data, then we would obviously only be suspending or ultimately terminating contracts once a very thorough investigation has happened into that discrepancy. The teams in our central operations function, which are managed by Mel Park, undertake those investigations into discrepancies. And I am assured that, and we've heard a lot about Horizon data and the integrity of Horizon data, as part of their investigations, they will obviously be looking to make sure and check whether Horizon could be at play and looking at any known errors, for example. But only when that determination has happened and we're sure that the discrepancy is as a result of the negligence, carelessness or error of the Postmaster, would we possibly enact a suspension or termination.
One thing we'll come to with a different witness is Post Office position is it's not pursuing civil claims for discrepancies based on Horizon data.
That's my understanding, yes.
And Post Office's position is it only seeks repayment without going to civil enforcement where the Postmaster agrees to pay.
Correct.
In these cases where we see terminations or suspensions, can you assist with whether on the bracketed numbers, whether within those groups the Postmaster disputed the discrepancy or suggested that Horizon was at fault.
I'm not entirely sure whether in each of these cases the link to discrepancies, the Postmaster would have disputed it or would have claimed that Horizon was at fault. What I can say, of course, is each of them would have been investigated very thoroughly. Where we suspend a Postmaster or terminate their contract, what we're not doing is suspending or terminating on the basis of them having discrepancies. We are suspending or terminating based on the fact that there have been contract performance issues. So to give you an example, in the majority of our cases, there are discrepancies that will have been caused by operational procedures in branch not perhaps being followed. Too much excess cash is a key one. Failure to rem in cash and stock, for example, or not undertaking daily cash declarations or your monthly balancing, which have all led up to the accumulation of discrepancies. But I'm confident that the discrepancies are investigated thoroughly.
And just on these numbers finally, I read this as the contract is terminated, in that Post Office itself is making a decision to terminate the contract. Am I right in reading this that it doesn't include situations where a Postmaster resigns?
That's correct.
That can come down, thank you. The decision on suspension and termination is taken by contract advisors. Do they report to you?
No, the contract advisors report to their head of contract performance and deployment, and they report into me.
You say in paragraph, we don't need to turn it up, paragraph 150 of your statement that the contract advisors used to sit under the branch assurance team.
The contract advisors used to sit within the same function as the branch assurance team, yes.
And that's been changed recently, has it?
It was changed in August last year.
And why was that?
Following a review of our procedures and processes by Group Assurance, who are looking at how we've delivered improvements following the Common Issues judgment, they identified a potential conflict with the branch assurance team sitting in the same team as the contracts team, and hence the decision was taken to move the contracts team under me.
Please, can we look at page 64 of your statement, paragraph 154? You refer to the 4 current contract advisors. 1 joined Post Office in 2005, area manager for 9 years, now acts as a contract advisor. 2012, another joined then, B, worked in various roles in the business, now a contract advisor. If you go down, please. C, another joined in 1981, started the role of contract advisor in 2006, and the D, the 4th, is more recent. We then go down, please, 155. We see the head of contract management and deployment, employed by the Post Office since 2003, took a role of contract advisor in 2011. The inquiry has heard evidence about during the period, well, we're looking at 2000 to 2012 and thereafter, where the process for suspension and termination has been criticised, in particular that there was an expectation to respond to discrepancies robustly in the appeal process and the decision process. What steps has Post Office taken to ensure that the contract advisors who were involved in those decisions have learnt from those criticisms that have been made?
So I think I touched on some of this when we were talking about our training team as well, and people who were in post prior to the common issues judgment. All of the contract advisors, whether they were in the business or since they've come in since, have all had training, quite structured training, delivered on the implications of the Horizon IT inquiry, the findings from the common issues judgment. They've also had clearly training on the new terms that have been added to the contracts as well, the implied terms, which clearly do give a focus on our approach to suspensions and terminations, and it gives a focus as well on the management of discrepancies and how we will support postmasters more. So they have all had training on the implications, and again, they will have reviewed the policies associated with their role on an annual basis to make sure that they're doing their job in line with those policies and procedures.
I was also look shortly at some of the review mechanisms that are in place as well, but can I look at suspensions in a bit more detail briefly? It's POL 20448-253. Sorry, that's my fault. It should be POL 00448-254. So this is the Postmaster support policy on contract suspension.
Yes.
If we can turn, please, to page 17. And down to the bottom of the page. It says suspension will only be applied where absolutely necessary to review the cause of a potential contractual breach identified by the contract advisor and where all alternative options have been considered. Is that the test that is to be applied then by contract advisors when considering whether or not to suspend a postmaster?
Yes, and they are absolutely trained and given instruction that suspension should be the last resort and only when issues aren't capable of being remedied.
We've heard a lot of evidence about some policies being under review. Is that test being considered for review or change, or is that a settled test?
I think we're always up to getting feedback and changing things if we need to. These are reviewed on a very regular basis and reviewed by RCC and ARC, our two governance forums. So at the moment, that is the position, that suspension is absolutely the last resort.
And there's no I appreciate these things are reviewed, but is there any indication that test will be lowered or weakened in future?
No, not in my view.
Could we please look at your statement, page 72, paragraph 176? You say that the decision of so the contract advisor make a recommendation to the head of contract and deployment on suspension, who makes a final decision. That decision is then reviewed at the next Postmaster Suspension Decision Governance Committee meeting, and you set out the membership of that meeting there. Why are there no either former postmasters or NFSP representatives on that panel?
And it's a very good question and something that we're looking to address, because the other panel, the Termination Committee and the Decision Review Committee, do now have postmasters or postmaster representatives on those panels. I'd be very keen to have a postmaster representative on this panel, and it's something that we are looking at.
So that's something the Postmaster
currently looking at, yes.
Is it in consultation with the NFSP over that matter?
It will absolutely need to be in consultation with the NFSP, and the NFSP do input to and approve all of our policies actually before they go to our Audit and Risk Committee.
At paragraph 177, so it's just below, there we go, thank you. You say, to date, no decision has been overturned by the Postmaster Suspension Decision Governance Committee. Do you think that's a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing because I think it genuinely shows that we have followed the processes and procedures and been fair and transparent to postmasters when making suspension decisions.
It might be said that it shows that the governance committee is not properly overseeing it and challenging the decisions that were made. What would you say to that?
It could show that. I don't think that's the case. I think the members of the Suspension Decision Governance Committee have all had training. They've all had training on the contract. They've all had training on the CIJ judgment handed down. And I'm confident in the decisions that they are making. And we've got some good representatives there from across the business.
Has there ever been consideration for any independent review or input to ensure that the Decision Governance Committee is doing its job properly?
So the Decision Governance Committee, as with our other committees, have been looked at by our group assurance function, who are reviewing much of what we do across the retail function. I believe that they think it's fit for purpose at the moment, as there have been other conversations more generally, not just about suspension decision governance committees, around the possible use of independent external organisations to further assure our work. So that again is something that's ongoing.
And what sort of numbers are we talking about to get to the governance committee? Of the people who are suspended, roughly at least, can you tell me how many take the decision to the committee?
So this committee here, sir, is our internal suspension decision committee, and every suspension decision, every one of them, is ratified by this committee.
Right, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that.
Thank you, sir.
Could we please look at poll 20448-206? This is the equivalent support policy, but for contract termination. Could we please look at page 18? If we go down to repudiatory breach, please. Apologies. So we have examples here of a repudiatory breach, and we see in the middle where discrepancies of a significant value have been caused by the negligence, carelessness or error of the postmaster, resulting in a loss to post office, and which have been fully investigated by post office. Firstly, what is significant value in this context?
I don't think we actually have a definition of what a significant value is. But I mean, we're certainly here talking about values over, certainly over £10,000–20,000, I would have thought. But we don't have a definition of a significant value.
But is it still the case then that if there was it appears that if there are discrepancies of a significant value, that the post office considers was caused by negligence, carelessness or error of the postmaster, that is in and of itself a ground for terminating the contract?
That in itself is grounds for terminating a contract. But I would add that, of course, before we get to that point, those discrepancies, whatever their value, would have been thoroughly investigated using the process I've described earlier, before we settled on the fact that they were caused by negligence, carelessness or error.
And in paragraph 163 of your statement, we don't need to turn it up, you say contract advisors do not investigate branch discrepancies or deal with the recovery of outstanding branch accounts. is it the case that they rely on another team in Post Office to do that for them?
That's correct.
And which team is that?
So that would be the central operations team, the Postmaster account support team.
And you don't oversee that?
I do not.
That can, and actually, sorry, could we move to page 20, please? Uh, 4.11, it says Post Office will need to consider whether it has complied with its own contractual duties in relation to matters relevant to the reason for termination. It goes on to say if Post Office has materially failed to comply with its own contractual duties in relation to the matters relevant to the reason for termination, it is not entitled to terminate on notice. Are contract advisors giving any legal assistance to determine whether Post Office has materially failed to comply with its own contractual duties?
Yes, they are. So the important point here is that the contract advisors are not lawyers, they're not legal experts. So any proposed decision to terminate a postmaster's contract, we would have external legal assurance on that decision. Only when that assurance has been given to us and that we've acted in line with the terms of the CIJ, we've acted, under our duty of good faith, not arbitrarily, irrationally, capriciously, etc., would we then take that decision to the termination decision governance committee for final ratification.
That can come down, thank you. If a decision to terminate has been made, there's then the Postmaster Contract Termination Decisions Committee. Can you explain what the role of that committee is?
Yes, so we've got if a termination decision has been proposed by the Head of Contract Management and Deployment, we've got the external legal assurance advice. We then go to that committee, who, very much like the suspension committee that we talked about earlier, is senior leaders within the organisation ultimately, with some legal input too, to review the rationale document, review the legal advice, and ultimately ensure that the teams have been working in line with its contracts, its policies and its procedures.
And if we look at Poll 20044825, and page 14, please.
Apologies, can I ask for some clarity here? We've just talked about the Termination Decision Governance Committee, which is the internal committee, and this document is now a separate review panel.
So this is the is this the panel?
This is the panel if a postmaster chooses to appeal a suspension or termination.
So is that called the Postmaster Contract Termination Decisions Panel?
This is the Postmaster Decision Review Panel.
Review panel.
Yes.
And
apologies.
No problem. So this is a separate body that's dealt with for appeals.
Yes.
And this is the body that's comprised of two senior leadership group members, one former postmaster, and one non-voting panel chair.
Correct.
Why is the panel chair non-voting, and so there's a majority in favour of the senior leadership group?
That's a very good question. I think the initial thoughts around the panel chair not being voting is so that they can more effectively provide independence and effectively chair the meeting. That's the case for a lot of our decision committees, that the chair would be a non-voting member. Looking at this again now, that does clearly skew slightly the postmasters versus senior leaders piece. So again, I think that's something that we should absolutely look at.
And in looking at something like that, would you liaise with the NFSP?
Absolutely. Again, this is something integral to our policy.
Thank you. That can come down. You mentioned earlier a review about, I think, considering whether independent input into these decisions or reviewing them is being considered. When will that review be complete, or when will there be proposals available?
I don't think I have any concrete dates on that, but it is an outstanding action that we have following feedback from Group Assurance, so we will need to work on that quickly. I would very much hope to have an updated view within this financial year.
So unless you have any questions on termination, I'm going to move to a different topic.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Mr. Stevens.
The last topic I have is very brief. Can we look at poll 2046000, please? This is an investigation report on Project Pineapple. I don't need to go through all of it, but can I turn to page 10, please? In the middle, it says, Martin denied that there was consideration of cancelling the Postmaster survey. He said there'd been nervousness in executive discussions because of the Bates programme, but never a discussion to cancel. However, Tracy Marshall confirmed that there had been discussion about cancelling the survey, and that she and others from within the team had pushed to ensure it went ahead, which ultimately it did. Can you just provide some background to the discussions on cancelling the survey and why it was continued?
So this is in relation to, normally we do an annual Postmaster survey, which tends to happen January, February time of each year, and we've done that since 2021. Following the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office programme in January of this year, clearly there was lots of external media attention, lots of, quite rightly, focus on the Post Office and the awful impact that the Horizon scandal has had on many postmasters. There were therefore some discussions around the timing of the Postmaster survey, which could have resulted in perhaps more negative feelings being given in that survey. This is a survey, so that we're talking about general Postmaster sentiment. So there were some discussions. I don't think this is quite a true reflection of my conversation and my interview here. I don't recall there being a discussion about cancelling full stop the survey, but there was certainly a discussion around potentially just postponing it by a month or so before it went ahead. The survey did take place this year, and I think it was March time it went ahead.
Thank you. So those are all the questions I have. Unless you have any questions now, I'll check if there are questions from the sub-postmaster. From the co-participants.
Check with the co-participants, please.
Yes, there's two sets of questions there. I don't know who wants to go first. I think Ms. Page first.
Fine.
Ms. Marshall, hello.
Hi.
Have you downplayed your involvement in disputes with postmasters over the years?
I really don't think I have, and I still maintain my position that whilst on the face of it, it looks as though I have sent emails which do talk about remote access, for example. I was very much passing on information from subject matter experts to my bosses at the time. I've never had any involvement with IT, with prosecutions, with investigations over my career history. But I do want to say I'm very sorry that it gives that opinion of me, and want to assure everybody that that is absolutely not the case.
Well, let's have another look at a different section of your email to Ms van den Boogaard and Mr Gilliland. It's poll 00294728. And as it comes up, you'll appreciate now, if not you say at the time, that this related to a dispute with the Ferndown branch. The postmaster and her husband were saying that there were integrity problems with Horizon. You appreciate that now, do you?
I appreciate that now, yes.
If we could scroll down to the bit that wasn't read out, it's got the heading Independent Review of Horizon System Integrity. Post Office Limited has allowed an independent review of the Horizon system in the past on one occasion, and then it refers to that occasion. It was to do with the trial of Mrs. Misra. It says this about the trial: the case made it to court on the 11th of November, and after reviewing all the evidence, the judge exonerated Post Office Limited in full, finding the Horizon system to be robust. That appears to be in bold. Do you see that?
I do.
During the course of the independent review, the defence legal team were provided with representatives from Fujitsu and the knowledge and experience of using the Horizon system. Fujitsu experts helped the defence team complete their investigation. The jury in the case of Misra versus Post Office Limited voted unanimously that she was guilty, and as such she is now serving time in prison. This has been a high-profile case due to the fact that Mrs. Misra is pregnant. Mr. Misra has made allegations that the defence team were not allowed access to all the information they required regarding the Horizon system, but the judge made no such accusation. If we could just go a little further down as well, the final paragraph on the page: in addition to the independent review above, the robustness of the Horizon system is audited on an annual basis by Ernst & Young. Never before has the quality and accuracy of the system been doubted here. Now, it appears that all of that information came from conversations that you'd had with Dave Hulbert and Andy McLean the day before. Is that right?
I think the conversations in this email, because I don't remember it, but having read it, that certainly the issues around Horizon IT remote access would have come from Dave Hulbert and Andy McLean. I don't think they would have been in a position as IT people to talk at length about the particular case of Mrs. Misra here.
So where did you get that information from?
Well, I can't remember who I would have gone to, but that wouldn't have been something that I would have known about or been involved in. So I would have been relying on, I'm guessing, some of my legal colleagues at the time to provide me with that information. It was not something I was ever involved in. Given
that the trusted sub-postmaster at Ferndown had raised the issue of Horizon integrity, why do you think it was that you and apparently Miss van den Boogaard and Mr. Gilliland were prepared to take these assertions from you, relayed via others, from various unknown people, rather than considering what the sub-postmaster and her husband were saying?
I honestly can't comment on why Angela and Kevin, who I think attended the Ferndown meeting, they didn't talk about any of the information that I relayed. I don't think. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? They should have been a little bit more upfront, I think, at that meeting, and asked for the perspective of the postmaster. I think at the time here, in 2010-11, the business position was incorrectly and wrongly that Horizon was very much a robust system.
Was it part of the culture that when there was a one word versus another word, a sub-postmaster versus someone else, the someone else was always believed and the sub-postmaster was not? Part of the culture of believing that postmasters were incompetent or dishonest, not worthy of belief?
I don't recognise that in the roles that I was doing, insofar as feeling as though postmasters were incompetent and shouldn't be relied on and that post office were always right. I don't recognise that in the jobs that I was doing. And in fact, of course, at the time here, my job involved a lot of involvement with the NFSP and hearing firsthand about the issues affecting postmasters. Whether others had that view, I can't say, but it was not something that I experienced.
Were others like Mr. Gilliland and Mr. Tuthill coming to you for this sort of activity, which you say wasn't part of your role, because you were willing?
No, I don't think so. I wasn't willing. I don't think I was complicit in any of this at all. I think they were coming to me, particularly Mr. Gilliland being my boss. As I've said, he did so on numerous occasions, asking me to go outside the remit of my role to find out information for him, to assist him in visiting branches or whatever that might have been.
Evidently, as a result of what you were told by unknown persons, you must have believed that Mrs. Misra was guilty of theft at the time.
I would have taken on face value from what my colleagues had told me. I assume so, yes.
Do you accept that you were wrong about that?
Absolutely.
When did you come to accept that you were wrong?
I think there was a widely held position in Post Office until the handing down of the various judgments that Post Office were not at fault, and that was a message that was given consistently in our communications.
Can you pinpoint a time when you recognised that Postmasters had been wrongly convicted?
On the handing down of the Common Issues and Horizon Issues judgments, yes, absolutely.
Would you say that that was about convictions? Can I just press you on that? Because, of course, there was a subsequent judgment about convictions. Did you connect it with convictions when the Common Issues judgment and the Horizon Issues judgment came out?
I don't think I would have done, no.
So when do you think you did recognise that convictions were wrongful?
I can't pinpoint it specifically. I mean, clearly since the inquiry has been going on now for some years, and I have, read and heard a lot of the horrific stories experienced by postmasters, I have now become very clear that those convictions were wrong. But I'm sorry, I can't pinpoint specifically when I would have been aware of that. Is it possibly
not until Bates versus the Post Office?
It was absolutely before then.
Just returning back in time, if I may briefly, the email that you sent to Mr. Gilliland and Ms. Van den Bogaard was part of the myth-making in Post Office. We've seen a lot of it, using sort of wisps of truth and spinning them to support what was the falsehood that Horizon was robust. Whether you were relying on others or not, you were part of that myth-making, that chain of lies and fabrications. When did you, personally, stop spreading those sorts of myths?
I can't think of other occasions when I have spread those myths or lies. In this particular instance, I was, as you've said, very heavily relying on what other experts in the business had provided me with. I don't think I've ever been spreading lies or myths in the business.
Do you have anything to say about your failure to raise your knowledge based on these email chains over the many years where Post Office was claiming not to have any remote access into branch accounts?
So whilst I still absolutely maintain that I wasn't involved in the particular issues here, and I'm getting the information from other people, I am incredibly sorry that I sent any emails with any relevance whatsoever to remote access or convictions. And I am hugely sorry for for the horrific things that postmasters and their families and children and communities have gone through over the last few years.
Can I bring up, please, poll 2041 6991, and this dates from 2011. If we just note that this is an email from Nigel Allen to Andrew Wynne with you on copy. If we go to the first three paragraphs, before we do that, the subject, Ferndown, loss settled by cheque, SPMR dispute. Thanks for this. I've discussed this with Tracy Marshall, and she's asked whether you could draft a letter to Mrs. Rachel Athwal, SPMR, explaining in as simple terms as possible what happened and why it is now necessary for her to send us another cheque. Mrs. Athwal is arguing that she did what the helpline told her to do, and as she has already settled the shortage by cheque, which is cleared from her bank account, doesn't see now why she should send another one, despite the surplus in the branch. And then this, Mrs. Athwal and her husband have already challenged the integrity of the Horizon system. So it needs to be explained that she has not been disadvantaged by any software problems and that Pol took the necessary steps to rectify this as soon as possible. In view of the sensitive situation at this branch, could you please send the letter to Tracy first and CC to me? So you weren't just investigating to help Mr. Gilliland with his interview. What you were involved in how to resolve the dispute, weren't you?
It would appear that from this letter, yes, but that was not part of my role at all at the time. Although, yes, that's what it looks like from this email.
What this email tells us is that you were well aware that the dispute involved the integrity of Horizon and that it was seen as important to assert that the branch had not been disadvantaged by a, quotes, software problem. You understood, presumably, what this was about. This was about the need to keep the edifice up so that SPMs and clients didn't lose confidence in the Horizon system. You must have understood that, mustn't you?
As I've said, I should have understood that. I don't know whether I did understand that at the time. It wasn't something that was in my remit. But yes, what I'm certainly doing is maintaining the business position here, that the issue with Horizon integrity should not be challenged, which, as I've said, was a position that was maintained for a long time incorrectly in Post Office.
You were sufficiently worried about the sensitivities that you wanted to review the letter before it went out.
Well, that's very unlike me in that role to have to do that, I have to say.
Do we know that, Ms. Page? This is a letter from Mr. Allen, who is suggesting that it be sent to Ms. Marshall. We don't actually, or I don't at the moment at least, know whether it did go to her, what she did about it, etc.
This is the only email that I have about that. So
yeah, well, I think we ought to be careful about making 5 from 1 and 1, if you see what I mean.
Certainly. If we can move forward in time to 2015, and if we could bring up, please, poll 00117439. This first page has, it makes it quite plain that there's a very large number of people on copy, and hopefully you'll take it from me that you're one of them. Indeed, you may be on page 2, which I'll ask to scroll to now. Yes, there you are, actually, towards the end of the long list. This comes from Mark Davies, and he says, thanks for taking part in a conference call on Horizon this week. And he then forwards a note, and we can perhaps just have a look at a little bit of the content of that note. If we go down to page 3, we can see reference there to the BBC Panorama programme, which is maybe going to go out. We can also see that there's reference to a parliamentary debate about the issue, i.e. the Horizon issue. And the talk about the fact that this may lead to further media coverage. If we could go down to page 4, please. We can see that he's set out various key points and messaging. And if we could go to a little further down. Sorry, just a little further up from there. There's the paragraph second bullet point down, which has the sort of classic line, if you like. There's no evidence that the Horizon system does not work as it should. This is the finding of independent investigators. It's been shown to be robust and effective in dealing with 6 million transactions, etc. So those were key messages sent to you amongst many other people in 2015. And this was essentially a script for fending off concerns about Horizon. Would you accept that?
I think it was a script for us to cascade to the wider teams, from what I can make of the email, to use if approached by the media, if approached and asked questions by postmasters. Yes, it has to be that.
How many times do you think you would have adhered to that sort of a script when dealing with concerns about Horizon?
Probably, it's hard to say. I don't remember how many times I had those conversations. I certainly never spoke to the media about it. At the time of this, sorry, is it 2015?
Yes.
Did you say? At 2015, well, from 2012 through, well, all the way through to my current position, I've been working on programmes on the network transformation programme at this point. So I wouldn't have been interfacing actually directly with postmasters or the media. So I don't know how often I would have used it, but it wouldn't have been frequently.
We can also, I won't take you to it to save time, we can also see that in 2019, reference poll 00268061, you were again part of a group Mark Davies copied in following the Common Issues judgment and how to handle the media fallout from that. There was a summary of the Common Issues judgment attached and some tips on how to handle the media. Do you remember receiving the Common Issue judgment, the summary of it?
Do you mean the media summary, the tips as you call
Yes.
it, or the?
Let me put it in a different way. When did you first appreciate what was said in the Common Issue judgment?
Only when it was, probably after it was handed down. I think when it was handed down, there was certainly shock across the post office that was the outcome.
Can you tell us about your own personal reaction, please?
Well, Ms. Page, I'm sorry to sound difficult, but I'm not sure that this is actually going to help me in terms of what I have to really decide on my terms of reference. I mean, it's clear, is it not, from everything that I've heard already, that everybody in the post office expected to win, but they lost. So then I had to come to terms with it.
What I'm trying to get at, sir, and I hope that it won't take very long, and that it, I would suggest, is relevant to this phase, is when did it really dawn on Miss Marshall that Post Office had got it wrong for all those years and there was a need to really change? And it's the change that I'm driving at.
I think you can all safely conclude that everybody in senior positions realised they needed to change once they read and digested that judgment.
Well, sir, that's what I'm exploring.
Yeah, well, I don't think you need to. I think I've got that point. Whatever Miss Marshall says. All I'm saying is it's self-evident, is it not, Ms. Page?
Well, I'm not sure it is. That's exactly my point, sir. I think that there's reason to think that it may have taken some time before people realised the need for change.
Well, that may be right as well, but I have to look at it objectively, don't I? Anyway, sorry, go on.
I'm happy to answer if you want me to.
When did you think that there was going to be a need for serious change?
I think I was in quite a fortunate position at the time, personally, that by the time the Common Issues judgment was handed down, I was already very much in a role focused on postmasters and making improvements. So whilst there was some shock at the fact that the Post Office had lost both of the trials, the Common Issues and the Horizon Issues judgment, and there was a shock at the extent of our failings as an organisation, I was personally, I think, very quick, because I was already focusing on the things that weren't working for postmasters, and that's kind of a role I've had ever since.
You've told us about the people that you work with in contract management who are mostly, the contract managers and their boss are mostly people like yourself who've grown up in post office, if I can put it in that way, people with very long careers in post office.
Some of them are, yes.
And you've told us that the structured training on the Common Issues judgment and the inquiry and so forth is something that they've all had to go through.
Yes.
Did you have conversations with people afterwards about what that meant?
I've had conversations with many people across Post Office and my wider teams ever since 2019 about the impact of common issues judgment. I've had many conversations with postmasters about it. I've had many conversations with the NFSP about it.
Have you spoken to them about the sort of activity that we can see that you were involved with, albeit you say tangentially, of spinning myths, of perpetrating myths? Have you talked to them about that and their own conduct of that sort of behaviour and how they feel about it and whether they see they need to change?
The first I remembered of any of the emails that you've shown me today was when they were disclosed to the inquiry. So prior to that, no, I hadn't, because I couldn't recollect being involved. Since they've been disclosed, yes, I have had conversations with my own team and other colleagues across the business about those emails, about my perceived role in those. And I think that certainly the emails that you showed me points to, culturally, a post office that was very flawed in the past. What I can say is that, you know, in the roles that I've been doing, and from my perception of the wider business now, we've got more work to do, of course, but we have significantly changed culturally. That's what I see. Prior to 2019, I don't think we've really put postmasters at the heart of very much. Nowadays, we absolutely do. And that's right. That's got to be right, and we've got to continue to do that.
Only today, through questioning, have you identified, for example, the need to review the guidance which puts the burden of proof on postmasters to demonstrate why they're disputing a discrepancy. Do you think that your past and the culture that you grew up in has played a part in that failure to fully change the mindset?
I don't. My focus is very much on making improvements for postmasters.
Has it got anything to do with why you hadn't identified, for example, that problem before?
No, it hasn't.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Page.
Sorry, sir.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes.
I think that's the first time that question's had any actual effect. I may be being overcautious here. I was reviewing the transcript, and at live note 86:18, Ms. Marshall was asked about, so when do you think you did recognise that convictions were wrongful? And there's a long answer, but it couldn't pinpoint it specifically. Then as it's on the page, Ms. Page's next question was, is it possibly not until Bates v. the Post Office, ? Answer, it was absolutely before then. I just think for clarity, can I ask, when you refer to Bates v. the Post Office, were you referring to the group litigation or to the ITV drama Bates and the Post Office?
Maybe a question for I was thinking it was the drama, the ITV drama. Is that correct?
So was I.
Yes, it's just how it reads is slightly...
No, understood.
Months down the line, but just checking that was what you were answering. Yeah. Thank you. Apologies, sir. I think Mr. Jacobs has some questions.
Right, fine.
I do, sir. I'm conscious of the time. I'll try and be quick.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall, Simon Oldnall gave evidence yesterday, and he said that Post Office doesn't recover losses from sub-postmasters except where a postmaster agrees the reasons for the shortfall.
That's my understanding at the moment, yes.
And you've confirmed that's your understanding in your evidence today. Now, Mr. Stevens took you in your evidence to the contracts termination policy.
Yes.
And you remember, we don't need to turn it up because it's fresh in our minds, I hope, paragraph 4.6, repudiatory breaches.
Yes.
And you remember that it said that where there are discrepancies of significant value that have been caused by negligence, carelessness, or error of the postmaster that result in a loss to the post office and have been fully investigated by a post office, that is grounds for suspension and grounds for termination.
Yes.
And do you accept that there is therefore scope within this policy for suspension based on a horizon shortfall?
There is, yes.
Yes. Why doesn't, and this is my question for you, why doesn't the Post Office, or why is it that the Post Office does not recover shortfalls unless the sub-postmaster agrees, but applies a different approach in relation to suspending and terminating on the basis of shortfalls. Do you see that there's a disconnect there, Ms. Marshall?
I do, and I can't comment on why we don't recover shortfalls apart from where the Postmaster agrees that that's not my area. I think in the cases of suspensions or terminations where there are discrepancies and where the Postmaster might not agree with the reason for those discrepancies, I'd refer to my earlier point that where we're taking decisions to suspend or terminate contracts, the team aren't basing those decisions on discrepancies as such. They're making the decisions based on that being the outcome, as in it's due to operational performance issues in branch, such as having lots of excess cash or not doing monthly, weekly trading, etc. But I appreciate there is a slight disconnect there in the language.
And I think our point, which I ought to, in fairness, put to you, is don't you think that the policy should reflect that? Should reflect that suspensions and terminations will not be pursued in relation to horizon-generated shortfalls?
I think we need to tighten up our wording. Of course, having a discrepancy in a branch and having shortfalls is by definition a reason for an investigation to happen by the central operations team, but we can tighten up our wording, absolutely.
I mean, it's more about wording, isn't it? Our clients tell us that they are concerned that the wording of the policies does not reflect the express intentions given by you and other witnesses from Post Office who are giving evidence in this phase. Do you see that?
I do, and I think it's very clear to me that the position that we take in our policies should be the position that myself, others, our teams are all adhering to. I also hope that with the publication of these external facing policies that I talked about on a new template, that will hopefully provide clarity to postmasters too. The key thing for me is that we do want to include postmasters much more in day-to-day operational matters such as that, so I would welcome any feedback that they have on the wording of such policies, etc.
So are these policies likely to be reworded or reviewed?
All of the, as I've said, are always reviewed on an ongoing basis. We're putting them on externally facing templates, which are going to be looked at by the NFSP. Very happy to bring other postmasters into the fold there too before they're published.
You've anticipated my next question. Will sub-postmasters be allowed to or be permitted to see these policies in draft before they're published and be consulted on?
We certainly want to include other postmasters in the consultation of those policies, and you know, our postmaster Ned looks at those policies as well, Elliot Jacobs, as well as Mark Eldridge, our postmaster experience director.
I've one final quick series of questions for you, and this is in relation to the Fujitsu letter. Are you aware of that from Mr.
I'm
Patterson
aware
to
from
Mr.
previous
Reid?
evidence, yes.
And I'll quote from it. It's the 17th of May 2024. To be clear, FSL will not support the Post Office to act against sub-postmasters. We will not provide support for any enforcement actions taken against Post Office against postmasters, whether civil, criminal for alleged shortfalls, fraud or false accounting. When did you first see this letter? When were you first made aware of it?
Only in the inquiry.
Okay. And the contracts termination policy that we've talked about requires a full investigation, doesn't it?
Into discrepancies, yes.
How can Post Office fully investigate discrepancies without assistance from Fujitsu? That's a real problem, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think I'm very confused personally by the letter.
And Fujitsu doesn't consider that the Horizon system should be used as evidence, should be used to evidence shortfalls. Do you accept that the Horizon system should not be used to support suspensions of terminations based on shortfalls?
As I'll go back to my previous comment, I'm quite confused with the letter from Paul Patterson and why Fujitsu won't stand behind their data. I'm not a data expert or an IT expert, but it's fascinating that they can't stand behind the data when the data is fundamental to everything that we do in our operations, quite frankly, across our network.
Well, you say it's fascinating, but it's because of what happened in the scandal, isn't it?
Sure.
And the effect of that letter makes many of Post Office's policies unworkable, doesn't it?
I understand.
I don't need to ask you any more questions.
Thank you.
That's all from me. Thank you.
In the light of those questions, can we just revisit paragraph 143 of your witness statement, Ms. Marshall? I'm sure that it's WITN 116-10100, because I want to be sure I'm fully understanding the table, all right?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Once it's up. Just a little further on, please. It's actually on page 61. That's what I'm looking for. That's it, that table. Now, as I've understood it, I'm concerned only with the most recent period, all right? So let's start in 21/22. So in that year, there were 25 branches where suspensions occurred, yeah?
That's correct, sir.
And that may or may not mean 25 postmasters. Some postmasters may have had more than one branch. So we should focus on branches, yeah?
Correct.
And the figure in brackets, 13, as I've understood what follows under figure 1, means that they were cases which relied on horizon data.
That's correct, sir.
Fine. So what I want to know is, was the reason for the suspension that Horizon demonstrated a shortfall, or was the reason something different?
Without knowing the specifics of each case, sir, I would say that the majority of them, in brackets, the 13 there that's highlighted, would have been following the result of an investigation into discrepancies or shortfalls, which would have been down to Horizon data. The suspension would have been enacted as a result of that, yes.
But you also seem to be saying, in parts of your evidence, that there wouldn't be a suspension simply because Horizon showed a shortfall. There would only be a suspension if there was an established reason after an investigation for which justified a suspension. So do I take it that what you're telling me is that the starting point is that Horizon shows a shortfall? There is then an investigation into how that shortfall came to be caused. And it is only if that investigation demonstrates, in effect, some fault on the part of the postmaster that a suspension would follow.
That's correct.
So that's the process that I should understand, is it, when I interpret this table. In that year, there were 25 suspensions, 13 of which, in effect, commenced by reason of Horizon showing a shortfall, but they only occurred because following a suspension was thought to be justified because of the activities or actions of the postmaster.
That's correct. The figures in brackets there, the 13, would have been based on Horizon data, discrepancies or shortfalls identified, but there would have been a full and proper and thorough investigation into the cause of those shortfalls, which would have then led to the determination to suspend the contract, sir. Yes.
And in the years that we're talking about, 21/22 onwards, whether or not the suspension actually occurs goes through the process that you described in evidence when Mr. Stevens was asking you questions.
Yes, sir.
Fine, all right. Then that deals with that. And then the final point I want to ask you about is the years 21/22 and 23/24 and the footnotes to the cases in progress, all right?
Yes.
So there are still from 21-22 2 cases in progress. That's right, is it not?
Yes. Could we go to the footnote,
Sort of.
please, sir?
Neither of which depend upon an horizon shortfall, as I understand it.
The footnote 18, which we've just looked at, relates to postmasters having been arrested and charged with offences, yes.
Get to 18, there's naught in brackets after the 2, you see? If we go back to the table, sorry, you see there's 2 cases in progress,
Yes.
but in brackets naught, which to me says neither of these were dependent, even as a starting point, on a horizon showing a shortfall.
That's correct, sir, because these were both cases where the police had intervened and the postmaster had been charged with offences.
Fine, so I needn't bother with those. Now that I've got that, fine. It's the next one, 23/24, where there are still 4 cases in progress, but 2 cases start life, if you like, with horizon demonstrating a shortfall.
Yes.
Now, are those 2 cases the 2 cases which are referred to in footnote 19?
Can we scroll down to footnote 19, please? That's correct, sir. So the 2, if we look at footnote 19,
Yeah.
we are referring here, the ones in brackets, are the suspensions that have been prolonged due to issues in arranging postmaster meetings. One is now at the final stage and with external professional advisors.
So that deals with the long suspension. But my question was, and perhaps you don't know, whether the 2 cases in brackets in the table are also the 2 cases where the postmasters have been arrested and charged.
No, they're not, sir.
So in none of the cases, this is the point, in the table which we've been looking at, are they what I'll call horizon cases?
Correct.
Fine. Thank you very much. I just wanted to be absolutely clear as to where we were on that.
Thank you, sir.
Right, good. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Marshall, for coming to give oral evidence today and for making your witness statement on behalf of the Post Office. I'm very grateful to you for doing that. So what time shall we resume, Mr. Stevens?
So I'm in your hands. We can either do 2 o'clock or 2:10. I don't think we should have problems with time to start at 2:10 if you prefer.
Well, then, I do prefer.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.